The scapegoat's inheritance. The air in the grand ballroom of the Fairmont was thick with the scent of lilies and generational wealth. Chandeliers resembling frozen waterfalls of crystal cascaded light onto a floor polished to a mirror sheen. Every detail of Serafina Montclair's engagement party, from the hand-piped canapés to the string quartet playing Bach, screamed of the Montclair family's undisputed position in the city's elite. And yet, the only thing Leo could focus on was the cold, unyielding wall of indifference that separated him from the rest of his lineage. Leo Montclair was, by all accounts, a success. He had built a thriving tech firm from nothing, selling his first venture before he was 30. But in the eyes of his father, Harold, and his sister, Serafina, Leo's accomplishments were merely footnotes in a history book they were determined to erase. His success was achieved outside the family's traditional real estate empire, making it, in their estimation, illegitimate and almost vulgar. His relationship with Serafina had never been sibling rivalry. It was a carefully constructed dynamic of predator and prey. She was the golden child, the inheritor of the family name, beauty, and favor. Leo was the shadow, the one whose very existence seemed to remind them of some familial imperfection they preferred to deny. This engagement party, her coronation really, was designed to be the final, public assertion of his insignificance. Leo had arrived precisely on time, dressed impeccably in a bespoke charcoal suit he'd had flown in from London. It was a silent testament to his own standing, a tiny flag of defiance in a room full of people who pretended he didn't exist. He had approached the receiving line, offered his genuine, albeit strained, congratulations to Serafina and her fiancé, a man whose smile seemed permanently laminated. Serafina had offered a brief, dismissive hug that felt more like a social duty than affection. The air was already heavy with a premonition of disaster. The disaster didn't wait long. He wandered the perimeter, sipping a glass of lukewarm water, watching the Montclair table, the high table, fill up. It was a massive, ornate mahogany structure, designed to seat 20, draped in heavy silk and adorned with towering floral arrangements. His father, Harold, sat at the head, radiating the cold, distant power that had defined Leo's childhood. The other seats were filled rapidly by uncles, aunts, and cousins, all of them faces he hadn't seen since the last obligatory family Christmas, yet whose scorn he knew intimately. He waited, standing near a curtain, attempting to look engaged with the art on the wall. He waited for his mother to wave him over, for his father to summon him, for Serafina to remember her duties as a hostess. He waited until the final central seat, the one traditionally reserved for the eldest sibling or the guest of honor, was taken by his Aunt Vivian, a woman whose entire conversation revolved around the stock market and judging interior decor. Every seat was occupied. It was then Serafina, glittering in a gown that must have cost more than his first car, finally noticed him. She caught his eye from across the enormous room, not with warmth but with a sharp, calculated triumph. She excused herself from her fiancé and floated toward him, a glass of champagne held loosely in her hand, her emerald engagement ring flashing under the lights. "Oh, Leo," she said, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness, just loud enough for the nearby cousins to hear. "You look lost. Did you think we forgot about you?" Leo felt a familiar, sickening drop in his stomach. He braced himself, a lifetime of slights rushing back, the cancelled birthday parties, the ignored awards, the time she'd deliberately broken his favorite model ship and blamed the dog. "No. Serafina," he replied, keeping his voice even and low, "just enjoying the view. It's a beautiful room." She smiled, but it was a cold, sharp thing that didn't reach her eyes. She put a perfectly manicured hand on his arm, steering him away from the main table, towards the periphery of the room, past the hired staff, and near the service entrance. "Look, darling," she cooed, gesturing. "There, tucked beside a silver trolley laden with discarded cocktail napkins, half-eaten shrimp tails and empty water bottles, stood a lone folding chair. It was white plastic, the kind used for backyard barbecues, starkly out of place against the ballroom's opulence. It had clearly been pulled from the kitchen storage, a hasty and deliberate insult. By the chair, a large black industrial bin, currently overflowing with trash, emitted a faint, stale odor that the lilies couldn't mask. "I'm so sorry," she said, her eyes shining with malicious glee. "This table is only for family. The main table, I mean. We had to squeeze in Aunt Vivian last minute, and you know how she is about seating arrangements. She needs the end spot. She leaned in, lowering her voice conspiratorially, yet ensuring her closest friends, who had followed her with avid curiosity, could hear every word. We found you this little spot, though. It's cozy. Think of it as your own private VIP booth. Just don't lean back too far, it's a fold-out. Can't watch out for the kitchen staff, they can be frantic. Serafina straightened up, offered a smirk that solidified the intent of the entire charade, and pointed towards the plastic seat. Go on, enjoy the party, Leo. Leo felt the blood drain from his face, leaving a cold, hollow shell. The laughter started low, a cough from a cousin, a giggle from one of Serafina's friends, and then it swelled. It wasn't the sound of general amusement. It was pointed collective derision, a symphony played exclusively for his humiliation. They were laughing at the black sheep, the one who dared to achieve success outside their gilded cage. Being physically relegated to the trash heap of the celebration, the waiter, a young man who looked deeply embarrassed, dropped his gaze and retreated quickly, leaving the spotlight entirely on Leo and the plastic chair. In that moment, a profound, agonizing wave of sorrow washed over him. It wasn't about the chair or the party or the insult itself. It was the crushing realization that 35 years of trying to be good enough, smart enough, successful enough to earn a shred of respect or love, had led him here. He was not just unwanted. He was actively ridiculed. This was their final non-verbal expulsion. He could have walked out. He could have created a scene, tossed the chair into the lilies, or delivered a blistering retort. But decades of Montclair discipline, the same discipline that valued stoicism over emotion, kept his feet rooted. He looked Serafina dead in the eye, held her gaze until her triumphant smile wavered slightly, and then, with a movement that felt impossibly heavy and slow, he walked to the chair and sat down. The laughter subsided slightly, replaced by a murmur of impressed cruelty. He hadn't broken. He had accepted his punishment. The party roared around him, a kaleidoscope of noise and light. For the next 3 hours, Leo Montclair sat in his solitary seat, positioned perfectly to observe the entirety of the Montclair dynasty. Like an anthropologist studying a strange and alien tribe, he analyzed the scene with the detached, clinical eye he usually reserved for reviewing the quarterly earnings of a hostile competitor. The main table was a dazzling display of performative joy. Every toast was overly enthusiastic, every laugh was too loud, and the constant flash of cell phones capturing candid moments was blinding. They were celebrating not just an engagement, but their own perceived superiority. Serafina kept glancing his way, checking to ensure her victim was still present and suffering. When their eyes met, she would lift her champagne flute in a tiny, mocking salute. He gave no reaction. His face became a mask of profound, terrifying calm. He wasn't sad anymore. Sadness was an emotion requiring hope, and hope had just been incinerated by a white plastic chair and a trash can. What remained was a cold, hard anger, settling in his chest like a stone. He listened to the toasts. Uncle Richard, a man who had borrowed and never repaid a significant sum from Leo 10 years ago, spoke of family loyalty and the importance of keeping the Montclair bloodline pure. Harold, his father, toasted Serafina's flawless execution of life's expectations, a brutal phrase that highlighted the conditional nature of their love. Not once was Leo mentioned. He was a phantom, an expensive coat check forgotten in the corner. Leo watched his mother, Eleanor. She was beautiful, fragile, and utterly complicit. She avoided his gaze entirely, focused instead on adjusting the centerpiece. Her silence was the deepest cut of all. It wasn't active malice, but the passive surrender to her husband's and daughter's emotional tyranny. The fold-out chair dug into his back. The waiter, visibly uncomfortable, kept rushing past, apologizing under his breath. Leo refused to move, refused to acknowledge the discomfort. His isolation was his shield now, and his vantage point provided a perfect, unvarnished view of their hypocrisy. He reviewed his financial relationship with the Montclairs. Years ago, his father had given him a nominal seed investment, a paltry sum meant to keep him tethered, but which Leo immediately paid back with interest. He owed them nothing, financially or emotionally. He had built his own world, one free of their corrosive influence, Yet he had kept returning, foolishly believing that one day the gate would open and he would be welcomed home. Tonight the gatekeeper had given him a trash bag instead of a key. They think this is the end of my story, he thought, his jaw clenched, watching Serafina beam as her fiancé slipped a second, smaller diamond ring onto her finger. They think I am broken. They think I will leave in shame and never speak of this night. But Leo Montclair, the tech prodigy, the silent observer, was an expert in leverage. He understood systems, flaws, and the precise moment to deploy a counter-strategy. He had spent 3 hours absorbing the energy of the room. The Montclairs' pride, their arrogance, their absolute belief that the world, and every service worker within it, existed only to cater to their whim. Their security was rooted in their money and their name. And then the dinner service concluded. The waiters began clearing the tables. The string quartet packed up, replaced by a DJ playing loud generic dance music. The party was shifting from formal dinner to casual extravagance. The air suddenly changed. The DJ had just started a new track when the main waiter, the one in charge of the Montclair high table, a nervous, middle-aged man with a neat mustache, approached the head of the table. Leo watched the exchange with an intense focus that only the prospect of a dramatic outcome could inspire. The waiter presented a sleek, leather-bound folder. This was not the final check. It was the final itemized tally. Harold Montclair took it with a gesture of bored authority, a man used to signing off on fortunes. He opened the binder, his eyes scanning the numbers, and then his expression froze. It wasn't a shocked look. It was a look of disbelief. The kind of momentary mental glitch when a powerful machine encounters a variable it wasn't programmed to handle. Harold's eyes snapped up to the maitre d', who immediately looked away, already halfway across the ballroom. Harold flipped the folder closed with a quiet thwack that was somehow louder than the music. He leaned over and whispered something sharply to Serafina. Serafina's perfect smile immediately evaporated. She grabbed the folder, opened it, and her eyes widened in genuine alarm. Leo, from his isolated perch, smiled internally. He knew the Montclairs had a reputation for spectacular, over-the-top events, but Harold was notoriously tight-fisted when it came to unnecessary expense, especially for events that were not directly benefiting his business. A party of this scale at this venue, with the level of premium champagne being poured, could easily reach a dizzying height. The tension rippled through the high table. Serafina started pointing at lines on the bill, frantically whispering to her fiancé. The fiancé, pale and already looking out of his depth, shook his head, confirming he had no knowledge of the specific arrangements. Harold stood up, his face a mask of controlled fury, and summoned the head waiter with a stiff, demanding wave. The waiter rushed over, apologizing profusely before Harold even spoke. "What is this, man?" Harold's voice, though low, carried an absolute authority. The contracted price was based on a fixed menu and a tiered wine service. "This bill is almost double, $4,800. Explain the $2,500 supplement for exclusive seating arrangements and premium service area charge." The waiter, trembling slightly, kept his eyes on the floor. "Mr. Montclair, sir, I was only informed of the final seating requirements this afternoon. There were several late additions and nonsense. I personally approved the final seating chart this morning." Harold thundered. The waiter stammered, then, desperately trying to pass the pressure off, he looked around the room. He saw no one else to hold responsible. His eyes landed on Leo, the lone, isolated figure by the trash can. It became instantly clear. Harold, in his rush to solidify his daughter's seating arrangement and ensure the maximum number of high-profile guests, had delegated the final seating confirmation to Serafina. Serafina, in her zeal to humiliate Leo, had created a separate table, the plastic fold-out which, under the contract, might have been categorized as a last-minute, custom-exclusive reservation, triggering a massive, pre-agreed-upon surcharge written into the fine print. The irony was suffocating. The entire extra cost was triggered by the one seat meant to cause pain. The waiter approached Leo's table, his face a picture of relief mixed with utter confusion. He held the black binder out to Leo. "Sir, excuse me, but this is the bill for the exclusive private table. The host's instruction was that this seating area was entirely separate from the main party budget," the waiter explained, his voice loud enough to cut through the dance music. Carrying across the stunned silence that had now fallen over the Montclair table, Leo's head snapped up. This was it, the moment the universe had been preparing for since he was a child. The tables, literally and figuratively, had turned. The entire Montclair High table was now staring, their expressions ranging from Serafina's wide-eyed horror to Harold's apoplectic red-faced rage. They had planned to make him pay with humiliation. Now, they feared he might make them pay with money. They saw him not as the scapegoat, but as a lever of possible salvation. Leo took the black folder. It felt heavy in his hands, weighted with the years of emotional debt the Montclairs owed him. He opened it slowly, deliberately. The number $4,800 was printed in bold at the bottom, an absurd price for one plastic chair and one glass of water. Harold began to rise, his hand extended, preparing a speech, a rapid-fire transition from scorn to desperate camaraderie. "Leo, my boy, hold on a moment. There's a clerical error, a simple misunderstanding. It's all one party, of course. Just give me that bill, I'll clear it up with the manager." Serafina, abandoning all pretense of grace, pushed past her fiancé. "Leo, please. Don't be ridiculous, just pay the bill. You can expense it back to the company tomorrow. Don't cause a scene." Leo looked up at her. She was panicked. The mask of the golden girl finally cracked. Her fear was not about the money. It was about the impending public exposure of their collective greed and cruelty if Harold had to argue the bill in front of the dozens of guests still milling around. Leo smiled. It was not a warm smile or a smug smile. It was the calm, quiet, devastating smile of a man who has achieved perfect surgical revenge. The years of sorrow, the shame, the tears cried in private apartments, the endless striving for approval, coalesced into this single, pure moment of emotional zero. He looked past Serafina, past Harold, past the nervous waiter, and addressed the bill itself. He slowly reached into his charcoal suit pocket, not for a wallet but for the exquisitely crafted Mont Blanc pen he carried. He signed nothing. He circled the charge for exclusive private seating and the total. Then he looked up at the waiter, handing the folder back with immaculate composure. His gaze was firm and direct. "My apologies, but there seems to be a slight mistake," Leo said, his voice carrying clearly, cutting through the remnants of the dance music like a perfectly tuned knife. He paused for just a beat, letting the magnitude of the moment, the silence of the Montclair table, the wide-eyed anticipation of the waiter, settle. "I am not seated at this exclusive private table," Leo continued, his eyes meeting Serafina's one last time. He gave her a polite, almost pitying nod toward the plastic chair and the adjacent trash can. "That," he stated simply, "is not my table." He stood up, brushing a non-existent speck of dust from his trousers. The plastic chair wobbled precariously for a moment. The effect was instantaneous and absolute. Harold roared, a sound of strangled fury that was instantly muffled by the sheer spectacle of the situation. Serafina made a small, choked noise, tears welling in her eyes, not of pain but of pure, humiliated defeat. They realized simultaneously that he was refusing to pay the one cost they couldn't afford to argue over publicly. He had weaponized their own contempt. Leo gave the waiter a $500 bill, a silent private apology for the trouble. "For your service tonight." The water was excellent. He left the waiter utterly baffled. Standing between the roaring Montclairs and the overflowing bin, Leo walked past the high table, now a silent, petrified tableau of privilege unmasked. He didn't hurry. He didn't look back. As he passed his mother, he saw her finally look at him, a flicker of genuine regret in her eyes, but she said nothing. He simply nodded and kept walking. He walked out of the opulent, glittering ballroom and into the cool, cleansing night air. The sound of bark and laughter was replaced by the distant rush of traffic. The $4,800 debt now rested squarely on the shoulders of the Montclairs, a financial levy extracted by their own arrogance. The cost of one plastic chair was paid for by the loss of their dignity, their self-regard, and their certainty that Leo would always be theirs to command and abuse. He hadn't raised his voice, hadn't insulted anyone, and hadn't made a scene, the true hallmark of Montclair disgrace. He had merely stated a truth they had established for him hours earlier. He was separate. He was disposable. He was not at their table, and therefore he was not responsible for their bill. The revenge was complete, silent, and entirely satisfying. He pulled out his phone, called a car service, and smiled for the first time that night, a genuine free smile. He had finally paid his last debt to the Montclair family, the debt of expectation. The next morning, the fallout began not with anger, but with panicked damage control. Leo's phone began ringing precisely at 8:02 a.m. It was Harold. Leo let it ring 3 times before picking up. "Leo, you answer me right now. What in God's name was that spectacle last night? Do you know the embarrassment you caused?" The manager called me demanding payment, threatening to cancel our contract with the firm. Harold's voice was a ragged mix of fury and fear. "Good morning, Father," Leo said calmly, already on his 3rd cup of coffee, enjoying the morning sunlight in his own apartment. "I assume you're referring to the private catering charge for the supplementary service area." "Supplementary?" "It was a joke, Leo. A private family joke. We were going to call you over later. You deliberately sabotaged your sister's night." "No, Father," Leo corrected gently. "Your daughter Serafina was quite clear. She stated, and I quote, 'This table is only for family,' referring to the high table. She then directed me to a separate fold-out chair by the service entrance for my use. I respected her explicit seating instructions for her exclusive party. That chair, that table, was not part of the main family arrangement. The bill logically belonged to the person using the separate service area." Leo allowed a long, eloquent silence to settle over the line. Harold sputtered. "You paid for a $5,000 suit to sit by a trash can, and you're arguing semantics over the bill. You're bankrupting your own family over pride." "I am not bankrupting anyone, Father. I am establishing clear boundaries based on the seating arrangement you sanctioned. If the high table was meant for family, and I was given the auxiliary table, then I was not considered a party to the primary guest list. You established the terms of my exclusion. I merely applied the financial logic." Harold took a deep, shuddering breath. He knew instinctively that arguing further would be useless. Leo had him trapped in a perfect cold circle of rationale. "Fine," Harold hissed. "I'll pay it. But you will regret this, Leo. You will regret turning your back on your blood." "I didn't turn my back, Father. I was pointed toward the trash can and told to sit. I simply refused to pay the price of admission for that view." Leo paused, then delivered the final calculated cut. "Speaking of payment, I will be sending over the paperwork today to formally divest my holdings from the Montclair Family Trust. I will, of course, be selling my shares in Montclair Properties. Given that I was so explicitly placed outside the family orbit last night, I see no reason to remain financially tethered to it. You will find the market valuation to be fair, but I will require a cash settlement within 90 days. The gasp on the other end of the line was the sound of a dynasty realizing it had made a catastrophic, multi-million-dollar mistake over a cheap plastic chair. Selling his shares, even the minority stake he held, would destabilize the voting power and leverage Harold held with the banks, costing them exponentially more than the $4,800 bill. "Leo, you can't—" Leo didn't wait for the plea. He pressed the end call button. He stood up, walking toward the window, watching the city wake up. The sorrow of the previous night was gone, replaced by a crystalline clarity. The ultimate revenge wasn't refusing the bill. It was finally recognizing his own worth and walking away from the toxicity entirely. The plastic chair had been the most valuable seat he had ever occupied, for it had finally shown him the true price of belonging, and it was a cost he was no longer willing to pay. The Montclairs were left with their gold, their beautiful ballroom, and their $4,800 bill, a receipt for the exact moment they lost everything that mattered. The story of the Montclair heir who was banished to the trash can would become a quiet, infamous piece of family lore. But for Leo, it was simply the end of his beginning. He was finally free,